If you had to guess how many days a human being lives for on average, what would you say? 300,000 days? 30,000 days? 3 million days? 456,000 days, maybe. Surprisingly enough, it is the second option, at only 30,000 days. Now, to put that into context, if you are 25 right now, that means you have roughly 9,500 days left to live. That is, if everything goes according to plan. And the scary part of all of this is that everything you want to achieve in life, all the achievements you crave, all the travels you still have left to do, all the relationships you are yet to develop, and all the moments you'll want to look back on, the ones that really make life worth living, all of those will have to happen in the next 19,500 days, or not at all. And that is, of course, if everything goes right. Because even though that's the average, it doesn't mean you'll be able to make part of it. Accidents, diseases, unexpected problems, and so much more can be quick to put a final period on your life story much before you're ready for it. Unfortunately, that's how it goes sometimes. Now, whether you make it to the average, way past it, or if you fall below it, the only certainty is that one day your time will come. As a wise man once said, "Death smiles at every man, and all a man can do is smile back." A painful, scary reality that so often we are quick to push aside, but nonetheless, a reality that, regardless of who you are, how successful you are or not, regardless of how much you achieve or how much you fail, eventually this will come to you. And since our days are finite, and in the context of not only humanity, but of time itself, them being so short, I want to pose this question, which is, why is it that we waste so much of this time in exchange for comfort? To solve this problem, we have to first of all understand why we work the way we do, why we think the way we do, and consequentially, why we act the way we act. Looking at a regular person's day, it goes something along these lines. Wake up, take a shower, get dressed, eat breakfast, brush teeth, go to work, do it for 7 to 9 hours, come back, relax with the entertainment of choice, have dinner, more entertainment, sleep, repeat. And even if your day is vastly different from what I described, in that difference, it is probably the same most days. Every day, there's a certain routine to it, certain actions you repeat every day, and if you repeat them long enough, they become habits that eventually start happening on autopilot. Now, I must also say that not only there's nothing wrong with this, it is the way things, in a way you could say, should go. Because as human beings, we're always wired to develop rituals and habits, after certain actions that we perceive are going to give us the biggest chance of survival. This happens because even though we've been able to exponentially develop our technologies and way of living, completely revolutionizing the way how we work, communicate, exercise, and live, despite all of this, our brains haven't quite had the same exponential development. Now, if you look at the part of your brain responsible for your instincts, your fight or flight response, your aggression, a lot of your emotional behavior, competition, domination, rituals, and habits developing, the so-called lizard brain, also known as survival brain, you'll find that this is the oldest part of the brain, meaning that this is the part that developed the least as our brains have evolved as well. And quite often, if not always, we rely on this part of the brain that is made for different times to take our decisions. Because whether we like it or not, a lot of our behaviors on the day-to-day, a lot of the actions that we take are based on emotion and not on logic. This is what leads us to indulge in certain habits more than we'd like. Whether that is video games, social media, or even substance abuse, what happens is that even though consciously we recognize that we shouldn't overdo them, subconsciously our brain doesn't quite recognize that, instead leading to big cravings that we so often fall prey to. Now, despite this being a big factor, even the biggest factor for most people, there is more to the story than just the way our brains are wired. While it may be easy and even comforting to put all our shortcomings in something outside of ourselves, something that we really don't have any control over, essentially assuming defeat before we even start, there are plenty of cases of people with a similar brain to yours, to mine, that have succeeded nonetheless. From Michael Jordan to Walt Disney to Bill Gates to so many more, there are countless examples of people who started in a situation that should have never allowed them to succeed, but despite that, they were able to do it. And even though we could dive deeper into their stories and find some inspiration and some motivation, for now there's something much more important that we need to do first. What if I told you there was a 4-step formula that, if followed, would allow you to implement any habit you desire, consequentially leading you to achieve the things that only seem like dreams in your current reality? The book you want to publish, the physique you want to attain, the financial freedom you so much crave. You would probably, at the very least, be very skeptical that a 10-minute video could solve any of this. Because if you've been struggling so far, how is it that, in the remaining of this video, I could give you this solution? Thus, I must warn you that this isn't a short-term solution, by any means. The advice I'm about to give you works, but not in the span of a single week or a single month. Because the nature of habits is that the more you do them, the better you tend to get at them, and consequentially, the better results you tend to get. What I will be giving you then are the guidelines to set any habit you desire, that, if in accordance to your goal, will allow you to achieve it. Now, this process can be broken down into 4 steps. First of all, the cue, then the craving, following that the response, and finally the reward. Taken from the research and conclusions made in the book Atomic Habits, written by James Clear, we can be very confident in saying that every action we desire to turn into a habit must pass by these 4 stages routinely and consistently. If you look at any habit you currently have in your life, it will inevitably pass by these 4 stages in this sequence. In mind, the question now becomes, how do we properly apply these 4 steps to the habits we want to implement? After multiple reads of the book and several real-life implementations of the advice, I can confidently say that this is by far the best method I've found so far to implement new habits. By far. Now, to put into context what those 4 steps mean, let me guide you to what they actually mean. So first of all, for any habit, there must be a cue, something that reminds you or that triggers you to not only that the habits exist, but that you then want to do it. This leads us to the craving, the second step, that after you notice, there must be some sort of craving to either complete the habit or to get the reward at the end that comes with the habit. In a way, before we move on, this is why it's so easy to develop bad habits of video games, of social media, of eating fast food, because all of these things are extremely pleasurable. And as soon as you get that reward once, the next time they appear, you're gonna immediately crave that same feeling. But getting back on track, so we have the cue, makes us notice the habit, follows the craving, that makes us, crave getting the reward for the habit, and following this craving comes the response, the actual action we need to perform to complete the habit, and then lead us to step number 4, which is the reward. There must be some reward for us at the end of doing the habit, because that reward is what's going to allow the craving to appear next time we do it. Knowing this, that every habit must pass through these 4 steps, now the question becomes, how do we actually properly set these 4 steps? That's what we're going to look at right now. For the cue, you're going to make it as obvious as possible. The craving, you're going to make it as attractive as possible. The response, you're going to make it as easy as possible. And the 4th one, the final one, the reward, you're going to make it as satisfying as possible. Now, to better show you how to do this, I'm going to use a personal example and how I developed my habit of writing. Now, this is a habit that I, started multiple times in the past, always started motivated, always started strong. But, 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, sometimes even 4 weeks in, as soon as, maybe work would pile up or some problem would come up that would stop me from doing it, I would stop, you know, I would start losing that consistency. And maybe I miss a day, and then next week I miss 2 days, and then I miss three, and then eventually I would stop doing the habit. And for me, this was something that was really important to develop, not only for content like the video we're watching or the articles I write, but on top of that, to help me think better and to help develop these ideas I have and that I study, and to actually go deeper into them and to not only think about them, but to develop those ideas. So, to do that, and following the Atomic Habits method, I first of all started by making the cue as visible as possible. For any habit you're trying to implement, the environment plays a massive role in deciding whether or not you actually follow through. And seeing as we tend to resort to the default decision our environment provides, for example, if there are some cookies on the table, you're usually gonna eat those instead of going to the fridge and eating some fruit. And if there's some fruit on the table and the cookies are stored away, it is much more likely that you'll eat the piece of fruit. That's, in essence, the default decision of your environment. With that in mind, the first step we must absolutely do is to turn the action we want to follow through on, whether that is writing, going to the gym, eating less, and making that the default decision of our environment. And on top of that, we want to remove everything in that environment that is gonna possibly distract us from following through. Now, for me personally, this meant, first of all, putting the writing task as the first task in my weekly planner. After that, it meant buying a new keyboard to really make me enjoy the act of writing, to really make me look forward to the writing itself. And just the final thing was to, every morning, as soon as I got to work, to open the file where I was going to write as the first thing and not open anything else, to really make sure that my focus was solely on that task ahead. Now, as for dealing with distractions, my desk tends to be pretty clean as it is because I tend to move a lot, so there's usually not much on my desk. But a crucial thing, like a quick tip I can give you as well, is make a drink, whether that is coffee if you like that, or tea, or even water. And when you get that need to procrastinate, to go to Instagram, to play video games, to open YouTube, instead of doing that, take a sip of your drink. Personally, for me, this may not work for you, but for me, this really helps calm that down. It's giving me something to stimulate my brain and consequentially avoid procrastination. Now, the final crucial piece when it comes to the cue that you want to implement is making sure that whatever new habit you're trying to start is being started after a previous habit, one you already have, is finished. For example, let's imagine, like me, you want to start writing as well. And let's imagine as well that every day, after you finish breakfast, you have nothing to do. And, having breakfast is something you do every day. With this in mind, you would start the writing habit immediately after you finish your breakfast, because you're using the ending of a previous habit as the cue to start a new one. With that being said, let's move over to number 2, making the craving as attractive as possible. Now, for this part, it's really important to understand that what makes us crave something is the expected reward at the end of doing this habit. Whether that is playing video games or going to social media, or on the healthier side if it is eating a salad, running, etc., etc. Now, for the craving part, it is really important to understand that what makes us crave certain things, whether that is foods, social media, video games, etc., is the expected reward each of these habits brings. The bigger the reward, the bigger the craving is gonna be. This is one of the reasons why it's so easy to develop a habit of using social media. Because for such a minimal effort, you're getting a huge reward. You're getting very quick dopamine spikes. Naturally, the brain will start craving this habit. On the opposite side, this can be why developing healthy habits can be so hard. Because as opposed to video games or social media or fast food, these healthier habits don't tend to give you a reward on the short term. You need to put the effort in, for a certain amount of time, and only then will you get the actual physical reward. And due to the nature of how our brains work, of prioritizing pleasure now over pleasure in the future, we have to create some sort of reward, especially when we're starting out, for these new habits that is gonna make us crave completing them. We have to create a short-term reward for the completion of these habits. So in essence, to make the craving attractive is to find a very pleasurable reward and associate it with the completion of the habit. Personally, for me, this was something that I already found a lot of pleasure on, and I recommend you do the same, using something you already enjoy, something you already do, and instead of just doing it, postpone it until you complete the habit. In my case, this was watching YouTube videos, just for entertainment. And while in the past I just used them for entertainment, I just watched them. Especially I used to watch one before I started to work. What I started doing is, instead of watching that right away, I delayed it until after I'd done my writing. Until after I wrote 500 words. After that, I could then go and watch the YouTube video. Soon enough, writing these 500 words every day not only became easy, it also became something enjoyable. It became something I was looking forward to do. And now we go over to number 3, which is the response, and we're going to be looking to make the response as easy as possible, especially when starting out. Now, the purpose of the previous steps is to increase your odds of actually following through with the habit as much as we can. And if these are steps you've never done before, you'll notice they will already help you tremendously. However, you still need to ensure that the action you're committing yourself to do is something reasonable and something you can actually do. For example, if you've never ran before and you decide to start the habit of running 15 miles per day, you're not going to be able to complete the habit. Even if you really wanted, and if you're really motivated, your body probably doesn't have that capability. And even if you were able to push through one day, the next day you'd be destroyed and you wouldn't be able to do it. That's why it is so important, especially when starting out, to make the first step, to make the completion of the habit as easy as possible. Because what we want to do when we're starting a new habit is to first of all focus on being very good with the consistency part, and only then focusing on the execution part. That means that if your end goal is to run a marathon, you should start developing the habit with anywhere from just putting on your workout clothes to running 2 to 10 minutes. Something that is easy for you to do. Especially if you're someone who really struggles with following through on these things, you want to make it as simple and as easy as possible. You don't even want this to feel like a struggle. For me, and because I already wrote in the past and I already wrote just not consistently, I started with 250 words per day, and I slowly increased to the point where it was at 500 words per day. Now, I must warn you to advance with caution, because this really depends on what you're trying to do, who you are, where you're at skill-wise, so advance with caution, please. And as for the reward itself, we already looked at this in step number 2 of the craving, but essentially, I'm not gonna prolong this too much in this step. You just wanna make sure that, first of all, the reward, it's not something that goes against what you're trying to achieve. So if you're trying to lose weight, the reward should not be to eat cake, for the most part, but you really wanna make sure that it is something that you enjoy, and that it's just not stopping you or slowing you down from completing the habit and consequentially achieving your goal. Other than that, as long as you enjoy it and it is reasonable enough compared to the effort required to complete the habit, you're all set. And putting this all into context, and especially if this is the first time you're hearing about all this, hearing about the steps, it can be easy to be motivated, to be excited to implement this advice, to kind of get your hopes up that now is going to be the time when you actually implement these things, when you actually follow through on your habits. On top of that motivation, of that excitement, you may be even already starting to plan what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, all of that. And due to all that excitement, due to all that motivation that may be there, I want to end the video with just a final disclaimer. And that is, things won't go perfect. Just because you have this new system, just because you have this new method to follow, doesn't mean things are going to be any easier. You'll still struggle. There will still be obstacles in the way, there will still be days when you don't feel like doing it, and there will still be days when you don't do it, when you fail to do the actions you actually committed yourself to do. And that is why it's so important to understand that it is not so much that you're trying to get everything right at the start, you're just trying to get started. And not only that, to track if you did these things, if you didn't do these things, and to continuously progress over time. Because if you do that, and let's imagine every week you take the time to review what you did, if you properly implemented the steps, if your execution was on point, if your consistency was on point where you should start, if you take the time to do that every week, and then you use that data of whether you did it or not, and you use it to improve, eventually you'll get to a point where now only seems like imagination, where it seems like a dream to you. But it does require that patience. It does require those weeks, those months to go by without you really noticing any progress for the most part, especially in the physical sense, because you may notice progress in the consistency, the execution of things, but a lot of times it's easy to not see physical progress, to actually see results. That is why it's so crucial to understand that it is not important to get things right at the start. What is important is that you start slow and steady, you track what you're doing, you improve on top of that, and you continuously do that over time. Because even if it may seem insignificant at first, as so many times it does, if you dedicate yourself to this process, continuously improving step by step by step, eventually you'll be able to conquer even the biggest mountains. But it all starts with the first step. Otherwise, it is likely that you'll just take the same approach of being motivated, of being excited, and even following through for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe even a month, but eventually cracking under pressure, neglecting all these habits, and essentially letting your 19,500 days slip by as you do nothing to grab them. Allowing all the travels you want to do, all the achievements you want to achieve, all the money you want to make, all the relationships you want to have, and see them all kind of slipping through your hands as you realize you weren't able to do the habits required to achieve those things. And to finish this off, I just want to say, if you want to embark on this journey, and as I'm sure you want because you're watching this video, you're probably applying some of this advice already, maybe you're not, but at the end of the day, slow and steady, continuously improvements over time, and you'll get there. You just need the patience. Thank you for watching.